Good day, everyone. It is Calxiyn here, and today I would like to tell you about the prized treasure within my RWBY collection, RWBY Fairy Tales of Remnant. For all the merch, figures, and books I have, let me be the first to tell you I would trade it all simply for the physical copy and audiobook. There is true magic in seeing the beautiful illustrations while hearing the brilliant Jesse Valinsky and Professor Ozpin himself read to you. In this review, I would like to explain what impresses me most about the book, but if you need the TLDR, the illustrations are stunning, the stories are captivating and magical, and RWBY fans are going to want this for the extended lore and depth that it brings to the world of Remnant. Murder of Birds and I read this book together, and for a lot of the stories, I felt warmed and happy, much like a standard happily ever after fairy tale makes you feel. But there are a good mix of those and traditionally more tragic or frightening fairy tales as well. There was an equal amount of times that I had to mute my microphone to yell into my hands, or was on the edge of my seat. Some of them are tragic and shocking stories. If you watch Arnold's review, he will most likely tell you how much he was freaking out as well. As for the overall quality, there were 3 or 4 that were just good and didn't feel necessarily as strong, but except for those ones, the rest were truly phenomenal. Another important thing that I want to note is digestibility. I love the coffee novels, but they are just that, novels, and there is a high chance that this may be more appealing to every RWBY fan versus the ones who read novels regularly. As I have heard for some, the coffee novels can feel like a really large undertaking and intimidating. So if the coffee novels were not your cup of tea or intimidated you because of the length, I would suggest giving this one a chance even still because they are completely different. This is also the perfect book to read to your child RWBY fan, and I know that some of my fondest memories are my mom reading us a Disney fairy tale collection book when I was a child. Similar to how I loved seeing other fairy tales within the Disney universe that I already loved, your child will be able to see RWBY fairy tales within the RWBY universe they already love. If you want to hear my individual discussions on the stories, I will be posting those, but for now, I want to talk about the most impressive part of the book to me. To give some background, I've been reading and watching fairy tales all my life, but as an adult in university, my English minor is made up of science fiction, myths and literature, children's literature, and, you may have predicted this, a fairy tales and fantasy course. Something that is really important to note about fairy tales is that they were organic, natural stories that came orally from the people. Over time, individual writers have taken them, cleaned them up to be more literary, like the Brothers Grimm, but despite all the polishing, unpolished versions that the scholars think were more close to what the people told still remain. And I say this all to reiterate that oral tradition of fairy tales is extremely important, as is their organic creation by multiple parties over decades and even hundreds of years. In summary, fairy tales have an extremely organic process that cannot be easily recreated, and I think that this is why I fell so deeply in love with the book, because they are alive. They are organic, natural, and magical like the fairy tales from our real world, and I feel like that Ozpin's notes really helped with this. Ozpin explains the differences between versions for a lot of the stories, and that he has collected these stories from people around Remnant. Ozpin really functions as the Brothers Grimm here, collecting the stories and making a cohesive version, but he also explains the other aspects included in other versions of the story, making it feel very real. The notes and explanations really gave it depth, as this is the type of scholarly explanation that is very similar to what I experienced in university. For example, in my course, we read a version of Little Red Riding Hood where Little Red was eaten and stayed dead. She was never rescued. And in the textbook, there were notes explaining why this version did this, what the other versions contained, and why this version prevailed in a certain corner of society, etc. RWBY Fairy Tales of Remnant does the exact same thing with Ozpin's notes, which makes it feel incredibly realistic. Again, in our real world, what we have, even from the Brothers Grimm, is a net result of hundreds of years of natural oral tradition. So the fact that this was mimicked so well, down to making it feel exactly like I was learning about real fairy tales again, is really amazing to me. Just like there are dozens, if not hundreds, of versions of Cinderella, it feels like the RWBY Fairy Tales of Remnant fairy tales could function similarly, with Ozpin going into the differences between all of the stories. I can't wait to analyze each fairy tale individually and really geek out in front of you guys, but for now, these are the highest compliments I can give. To sum it up, I am super impressed with the book. The stories were compelling, real, and extremely well written. The voice acting, if you choose to buy the audiobook, which I highly recommend, is absolutely worth it, and I would recommend grabbing both a physical copy and listening to the audiobook at the same time. I think that this book is also going to be better for RWBY fans compared to After the Fall and Before the Dawn, because it is less intimidating with illustrations as well as shorter stories. So let me know if this review convinced you. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them below so I can answer them, and join the Discord server if you wish to discuss the books at length. I will see you in the next one. Bye guys!